All right, let's get started. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Docker Hub Essentials webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ryan Kennedy, Director of Product Management for Docker Hub. I'm excited to be here and kick off what is the first in our series of Docker Hub webinars. Today we're going to be focusing on the essentials of Docker Hub. We're going to start off with an overview of Docker Hub. We'll learn how to get started with Docker. We'll take a look at a couple of different prerequisites, both accessing Docker Hub and getting a Docker Hub ID. We'll do a live walkthrough of the product to help you better understand how you can leverage a lot of the core features and functionalities that are available within your development environment. A couple of these include repository management. So we'll start with a primer of really Docker and how to build a container image, how to push and pull images to Docker Hub, and then ultimately how to manage container images from Docker Hub as well. Next, we'll take a look at the teams and orgs functionality and the ability for small teams, medium teams, even large teams to leverage a lot of the built-in RBAC controls and access controls that allow you to control who gets access to which content within Docker Hub, as well as some of the automated workflows, specifically the CI capabilities for automatically building container images from an upstream SCM like GitHub, and then configuring, briefly highlight how you can configure end-to-end workflows through things like webhooks. And finally, we'll take a look at the official images, over 160 official images that are available on Docker Hub today, that are from a number of providers, or images that cover a number of use cases from OS, base layer OSs to different programming languages. All right, so before we get into it, I think it's important to highlight that at Docker, we are really always looking for ways to make life easier for developers. This was true 7 years ago when Docker was first launched in 2013 at the PyCon, and it really continues to be the case today. This drives all of our product philosophy and all of our product strategy today. And so, if you look at kind of Docker Hub by the numbers, I think, whether containers will become mainstream is no longer a topic of debate. Docker Hub is now the world's largest repository of container images with an array of content sources, including, container images from community developers, open source projects, ISVs. They're all building and distributing their code in containers now. And I think, some of these numbers are representative of that. Who is Docker Hub for specifically? So I think there's three primary audiences that we target with Docker Hub. First and foremost, it's developers, providing tools and services for developers to quickly store and share personal projects, container-based projects in Docker Hub, and ultimately see what the broader community is doing as well and build on the shoulders of others in the community. For development teams, we offer a set of services that are targeted for collaboration and team management that can help restrict access, provide access controls as to who can view and access and manage different repositories for different types of users and different types of teams. The third is really ISVs and independent software vendors who are looking to containerize their own software and make that available to the broader Docker Hub community for people to build and incorporate into their own projects. All right, so a few of the quick key features and things that we will highlight today are private repositories, so the ability to securely share and collaborate around private container images, automated builds, which are provide the option of configuring your account in a repo with a Docker repo with an upstream SCM provider like GitHub or Bitbucket, and then automatically creating images based on commits to those repos, such that you can create a CI pipeline and automatically build and automatically test images based on changes that are happening when code commits. Teams and organizations that I mentioned, there's a series of RBAC controls and access control policies that allow you to control and restrict who gets access to which private repositories. Official images, publisher images, these are verified publisher images from very popular, well-known ISVs like Oracle, SAP, and others, as well as some series of automation tools, specifically webhooks that you can string together a series of actions and events based on events that are happening, downstream events based on events that are happening within a given repository. So when an image gets pushed, be able to trigger a webhook and configure downstream activities. All right, so with that, let's get started. Let's dive into the demo. And to do so, let's start off by getting a Docker ID. I'm logged into the Docker account, but I can quickly show you, how you can go about getting a Docker ID. So your Docker ID is the namespace that you will use for accessing hosted Docker services. This becomes your namespace when you are pushing, that we use when you're pushing content into Docker Hub for your own personal projects, as well as a login that you'll use to access Docker forums as well. So to get your free namespace, just go to hub.docker.com, enter a username, this will be your Docker ID, somewhere between 4 and 30 characters long, only numbers and lowercase characters. Enter your valid email address, a password, and then you'll click submit, and you'll get a verification email that will get sent to the specified email address, and click that link, and then you'll provide access to Docker Hub. You will also use that ID when you're using Docker Desktop. And so Docker Desktop is a easy to use application, both available for, as you can see here, it's go to docker.com/products/Docker Desktop. And it's an easy to use application that enables you to start coding and containerizing your applications in minutes. Everything you need to build, run, and share your containerized applications right directly from your machine. So you see here, I already have Docker Desktop installed on my laptop. Docker version, you can see that I'm running that latest version. You can also see in the help menu, or in the menu at the top, you see the little Docker whale icon, which indicates that Docker is running. You can learn more about your Docker installation here as well. Similarly, running 1903.8. And there's going to be additional features that we'll highlight in a separate video around Docker Desktop, but the core mechanics of which Docker version you're running are available in the help menu. So we also need to log in now to Docker Hub, to Docker rather, from our CLI. So I'm going to just type in Docker login. I'm already logged in. So this is just authenticated with my existing credentials, but if you weren't, it would prompt you for the Docker ID that you specified, the password, and you would then use that when authenticating with Docker Hub and pushing and pulling content from Docker Hub as well. Okay, so for the next step, let's go ahead and, so we've got our development environment configured with Docker Desktop, and now we can begin to containerize a application. So let's start off with a quick primer around how to build Docker images locally, as well as how to push and pull images to Docker Hub. And so for purposes of this webinar, we have a sample app that is illustrative of a bulletin board type use case. The app is built with Node. That's a pretty simple application, but I think for purposes of the demo, it's helpful. So just to kind of recap, remember a Docker image captures all, or the private file system that your containerized processes will run within. So you need to create a Docker image that contains just what your application needs to run. And so let's start off by taking a look at a Docker file, which is the basis of your Docker image. So writing the Docker file is that first step. to containerize your application. You can think of it almost as a sort of like a step-by-step recipe for how to build up an image. And so this one, particularly, this one takes in the node base image, the official image that is built by the Node.js vendors and validated by Docker um, as well. There's a few other commands. We're copying the application source code from our host into the file system. And these are, as you can see, there's a lot of the same steps that you might have taken to set up and install an app on your host. But capturing these as a Docker file allows you to do a lot of the same things in a very portable, isolated, secure Docker image fashion. And so let's go ahead and switch over to the CLI. And now that we have our source code, we have our Docker file, it's time to build our first image. And then ultimately we'll use this image to launch containers from it. And so let's just make sure. All right, so I've already checked this code out locally, and you can see here that I have my Docker file, which is similar to what we've shown over here. I'm going to now run a Docker build command, and just so I don't mistype anything, I've got a few handy commands that are pre-typed out. So we're running the Docker build command. We're giving it the image and name, bulletin board app, a tag of version 1.0, and we're pointing to our current location. All right, so you'll see that the Docker is stepping through each of the instructions within the Docker file. We're building up the image, and it was successful, as we can see here. And so we have now our bulletin board app. We run Docker images, we see our bulletin board app. All right, so the next step is let's run this this container and just see what the actual bulletin board app looks like. And so we're gonna, just for expediency, let's use our pre-type command. And so we're running the bulletin board app, tag version 1.0, and we're going to be exposing it on port 8000. All right, so switch back over to our browser, type localhost, go back to port 8000. This works, and it did. We see our bulletin board app. All right, so it's a very simple kind of bulletin board functionality. You can add an event, see a list of events. Show you it's working. And there you go. All right, so we've got our Docker image. We've built it. We've run the image, and now the final step is to share the images on Docker Hub. All right, so to do so, we want to tag the image bulletin board app in a particular way that will allow us to push it to Docker Hub. And so let's run this Docker tag command, which is going to take the bulletin board app, tag 1.0, and we're going to tag it as pkndr bulletin board app. So this is the namespace that I want to push it into, as well as the repo for that namespace. And so when I execute a repo for this image, when I execute this command, it's just going to tag tag that image as pkndr bulletin board. And so if we do our Docker images, we'll now see the pkndr bulletin board image that was just created. So now we want to push this image into our Docker Hub registry. So we will run this command, which will push the pkndr bulletin board app into the corresponding pkndr namespace and create a bulletin board app repository. So if this if this is successful, internet connection is a little slow, so it might take a little bit of time, but let's just quickly sign into Docker Hub while we're waiting. This is taking a little bit longer than should. This is definitely an internet issue. All right. As you can see, it's pushing the different layers into the repository. It should not take this long. Usually this is just because I'm on a very slow internet connection right now. Okay, so looks like it did succeed in spite of our extremely poor internet connection. And I'm going to refresh, and if all succeeded, all went well, we should see our, let me try and push it again. Seems like something didn't work. And if you guys have questions, if folks have questions, feel free to send them into the channel, the tool that we're using here, and we can answer those async. All right, so this one should have worked. Let's try it again. So we should see bulletin board app. Our bulletin board app, sorry about that. Okay, so we've got our, so what happened here? So we pushed the image to Docker Hub, and what happened was a repository in Docker Hub was automatically created. You'll see that this bulletin board app here under the pkndr namespace, we click into it, and we will now see a list of tags that represent, that are encapsulated within this given repository. So our tag 1.0, which we just created, the operating system, the architecture, and a few other commands, a few other bits of metadata around how you can push content into the image, the description, and the README, of which we do not have one for this particular image. Okay, so at this point, we've just to kind of quickly recap. We've installed Docker Desktop on our development machine. We've built a image of our application using the Docker file. We've then pushed that image into Docker Hub, automatically created a repo in Docker Hub. And by doing so, really it shows that how you can move images around, with Docker in a way that you no longer need to, install dependencies. Really, only thing that you need is just Docker on your machine. So if other developers wanted to download this image, they just need to have Docker on their machine, and they can then run that same application by having access to Docker and the image itself. All of the dependencies of the containerized app are completely encapsulated within your image, and they're isolated as well. And so you can, hence you can easily share those images on Docker Hub. Okay, so at this point, we've got our Docker Hub account. We've connected it to desktop, and we have our Docker repository. And really, a key point here is that a repository can hold many images. In this case, we have our single 1.0 tag, but you can push multiple versions of this image into the repository as well. If you wanted to view additional tags, you would just click into the tag view here, and this will show you internet connection aside. This will show you a list of your tags as well as the image size and some metadata about the image itself. All right, so we've got our digest, we've got the compressed size. This is the cumulative size that's taken up by the image and all of its parent images. If we want it, we can click into the digest and you can see the image history along with the individual layers and the sizes of the image itself. All right, so let's click back up into our repositories view, and let's talk a little bit about private repositories and the difference between public or private repositories and the best practices for both individual when you're working within in an individual context and with organizations. So private repositories, is the name suggests, allow you to keep your images private, either to you as an individual account owner or within a team in an organization. So to create a private repo, we'll just click on the private repo button, and here you see a dialog that gives you a few different options. You can choose which namespace you want the private repo to live within. So in this case, my personal namespace or a series of organization namespaces. We're going to just give it a quick name. This is going to represent a repo for another sample app that I have locally that we're going to push into this. So we're just going to call it Cheers 2019. We're going to make it private. As I mentioned, I highlighted this idea of this notion of automated builds. And so previously, we're not going to go into it right now, but just know that if you wanted to configure this repo with a upstream source repo, either GitHub or Bitbucket, you can connect to it here and specify the namespace as well as the repo, and then have automated builds kick off when commits are triggered or pushed to that repo in either GitHub or Bitbucket. So let's go ahead and create this repo, and here it is. Okay, so we've got our private repository here. It's empty, right? We don't have any tags here, so we need to add an image to it. So we're going to go back to the CLI, and let's take a look at the list of images that I have locally here. So this is our familiar bulletin board app, but I also have this PKNDR Cheers image that I previously created and tagged as PKNDR Cheers. So let's go ahead and push that image to Docker Hub and to that specific repo. So when I push PKNDR Cheers, it's going to automatically push this to Docker Hub in the PKNDR namespace and the Cheers repository. All right, and so fingers crossed, this doesn't take as long as it did previously. All right. Okay, cool. All right, so now if everything went well, we should see our apologize, folks, where everybody is working distributed these days and subject to the bandwidth of their home. So myself included. All right, so this sorry, but this hasn't shown up. Nonetheless, I think you get the idea that you can push content directly into a private repository. As we mentioned previously, this was empty, and you can based on different access controls. In this case, I've logged in with my PKNDR namespace, and I do have the ability to write or push content into this public repository. So let's skip into the next section of the demo. and kind of building on the private repository context. So pKnit, our bulletin board app, has a a tag in it. What we want to do is make this repository private now. And so we click into our settings tab, and you can see that you can toggle the status of the repository's visibility between private and public. And so if you have available repositories, in this case I do, I have 3 remaining because I'm on the micro plan, you can convert this to a private repository. And so I'll do so now. I'll make that private. And you can see here the little lock icon denotes that the app is private. So so now that once a private repository is created and is a repository is set to private, only the users who are signed in and have access to work at that repo can push and pull images to and from it. This applies to both. In this case, this is an individual repo, but it is an organization that construct applies as well as collaborators. And so a collaborator is somebody who you want to basically give access to the repository. And once you specify that individual, they can then push and pull images to and from your repository. However, they're not allowed to perform any administrative activities, such as say like deleting the repo or changing the status from public to private. So I'm just going to add a collaborator here. And you can see this individual will now be able to push and pull content to the repository. All right, so if you want to provide a little bit more granular access controls, read, write, admin controls, you would use the organizations functionality. And so let's just quickly take a look at what that looks like. So we're going to click into organizations, and let's learn a little bit more about how this works. And so Docker Hub lets you create and manage access to shared repositories of container images using this organizations and teams construct. Organizations are a collection of teams and the repositories that ultimately can be managed within those teams, by members of those teams rather. And the teams, as you would imagine, are a group of Docker Hub users that belong to an organization. So also a key point, a user cannot belong or log in directly to an organization. They must be a member of a team within the organization, and as a function of that, they have visibility into the organization. So let's start off by creating a organization. I'm just going to give this a fictitious name. Call it Acme Company, San Francisco, and there we go. We have our new Acme organization. All right, so we've created the organization. We also see that we have, of course, one member, myself, I'm the owner. We also have one team that's created. This is the owner's team. And the owner's team is a special team, has full access to all of the repositories within the organization. And people who are members of this team can do things like manage settings, manage billing. They can create a team. They can modify membership of the teams. And they can also access and modify the repository, the access controls that relates to the repositories within that organization. So this particular organization, because it's brand new, doesn't have much, if any, content in it. So let's go up to the organizations view and look at an existing organization, which is fictitious, but for purposes of the webinar, I think it's illustrative of how you can use the organization's functionality. So so again, you saw accessing your organizations is available through through the Organizations tab. A key point here is that when you log into Docker Hub, with a given user account, in my case, pKennedyR, and if you're a member of any team of an organization, you're going to see that organization list appear here. And if you don't see that organization, that basically means you're either not a member or you're not an owner of it. And so the org admin is going to have to provide you access to that organization. So again, let's click into the cloud organization itself. And let's go ahead and take a look at some of these different teams here. So I have a developers team with a few different members. Some of the access controls here, the settings for this particular team. But let's say we wanted to add a new team. So I'm just going to call this docs. And we're going to create that team. All right, so we have our newly created docs team. And if we wanted to add a member, we would just click add member, and you can specify a Docker ID or an email address. And so I'm going to add that same, I'm going to add a Docker ID for another user called Rhinoceros. We're going to add him to this team. And now, it's a team of one. All right, pretty straightforward. If we wanted to remove people from the team, you can do so by going to the members tab directly, and you can remove an individual from the organization, or you can also go in and remove them from a team itself. And so if I wanted to, from this test team that I previously created, I can just quickly remove an individual, just as easily as you can add individuals as well. So now, what if we wanted to give a team access to a specific repository? In this case, we saw the developers team has 5 members, and it already has access to the 2 repos in this organization: the results repo and the voting repo. And specifically, they have been given read and write access to this repository, which allows them to pull, push, and view the repository information. As well as for if this was an automated, which it is, a repo that was configured for automation, automated builds, you can also view, cancel, retry, and trigger builds. So let's go ahead and jump into the newly created test team. Actually, let's go to the quality team here. And let's assume we wanted to increase the privileges of the team for both the voting and results app. We can just click read write and on the voting repo, and we can click read write on the results repo. And this will automatically update the permissions for members of this team to be able to now pull, push, and view the repository information. So these 2 individuals will be able to perform those operations against the repos in this team. So let's take a look at what those repos actually are. And we'll use this as a way to highlight the next part of the webinar, which is the automation and the automated workflows piece. So we are going to go back into our cloud org namespace, and here are the 2 repositories that we were mentioning before, the voting and the results repo. And if we click into the voting repo, we'll see a similar view, which is showing that this is has 1 tag, but something different here, which is that you see a list of recent builds, and you also see this builds tab. So we want to highlight here is really some of the work, the CI capabilities that we have baked into Docker Hub that allow you to automatically build container images from an upstream SCM provider like GitHub or Bitbucket. So with Docker Hub, you can automatically build images in a repository that based on a repo that is configured with a upstream SCM. And so if you wanted to configure a repo to be for automated builds, you would click into the builds tab, click configure automated builds. Oh, this one isn't a good example. Let me go back to, I know I've got another example here that's probably a little bit better. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Okay, so anyways, this particular repo has been configured to with GitHub, as you can see here, specifically the cloud demo voting namespace and the voting demo repo, and as it has been configured, it allows us to list the specific branches and the specific tags in that repo that we want to have Docker images built from. So when I commit code to the voting demo repo in GitHub, based on the configuration that we have specified in for this particular repo, a webhook will get triggered and a new build will automatically kick off on Docker Hub, which will then produce, if successful, a Docker image. And so that Docker image would then be pushed into this particular repo. So what you see here is a list of all of the basically the builds that have been executed for over the course of time for this particular repo, and it provides a nice, kind of summary view of, color-coded bar chart of the queue time, which is denoted here in gray, whether it was successful in green, if it was failed in red, and really how long the build actually took to execute. You can also click into a build report, which is available at the bottom here with under the recent build section. And this is a nice kind of summary view of a given build. It shows you a link to the repo in GitHub or Bitbucket, the tag that was created based on that build, when, how long it took, as well as a list of all the build logs here. And so you can debug issues that might have arose during the course of that build. You can see the Docker file as well as README. That in this case it doesn't have one. So this is a pretty powerful tool that can be used to, like you said, automate CI workflows where you can have your team automatically, when you're committing code to a given repo, you can have builds automatically kick off, and you can optionally perform a series of tests through the auto test feature as well. And if those tests complete, then you can have your images be pushed to your Docker Hub repo. And so, so we'll go a little bit further into the automation capabilities in the subsequent demo, or rather the subsequent webinar. But I really just wanted to highlight, a few examples of repos that have that configured, and ultimately what you can do with automation. So in the following webinar, we'll go into how to set up from scratch, how to set up an automated build in Docker Hub, how to set up automated tests so you can automatically test changes to your repos using containers and create a continuous integration testing service, as well as setting up webhooks and HTTP callbacks that are triggered when certain events happen for your repo. So if you've pushed a new image into Docker Hub, into a repo, you can have that kick off a downstream event. Okay, so last but not least, let's take a look at the Explore view, and we'll take a look at official images. So official images are basically high quality container images that are made available to the community on Docker Hub. These are curated set of Docker repos that are designed for a few things. One is to provide essential base OS repos. So, Ubuntu, for example, it's one of the popular OSs that serves as the starting point for a majority of users. There's also popular programming languages, as you saw, that we use the Node official image inter app, and that's also available here. So if you're interested in learning more about a particular official image, feel free to go to the Explore section. You can read a description of the image itself, some information about the available tags, and also how to go about accessing that content itself. Okay, so with that, I think that actually wraps up what we had scheduled for today's webinar, and quickly kind of walk through what we highlighted today. So first, we showed you how to get started with Docker, how to download Docker Desktop, get your Docker ID, as well as we saw an overview of the repository management capabilities in Docker Hub. We started with a quick primer on how to build an image using a Docker file, how to push and pull that image to Docker Hub, as well as some of the core container management capabilities on Docker Hub, specifically using the private repos functionality to restrict access to a given repo. We then took a look at the teams and orgs functionality that allows you to provide more fine-grained RBAC controls, set up teams, add team members, and then control which team members can get access to which repos. And then we took a quick look at the automated workflows section, so you can automatically use Docker Hub to configure with an upstream SCM provider a given tag or branch, and then automatically create images based on commits to those repos. And then finally, we took a quick look at the official images, 160 plus of official images that are available on Docker Hub, including a number of base OSs, as well as drop-in solutions for different programming languages, programming language runtime environments, data stores, and other services. All right, so that about wraps us up for the content today. Quick next steps before we take questions. One, download Docker Desktop. That's your starting point. Docker for Mac, Docker for Windows. Sign up for Docker, a Docker ID on Docker Hub. This is going to be, the namespace that you're going to be using to, ultimately push and pull content through to Docker Hub. Choose a plan that's right for you. So we have 3 plans that are available today. A free plan that provides unlimited public repos, as well as 2 different plans for individuals, one for individuals, one for teams. And based on the number of repos and parallel builds that you need, you can choose the number that's right for you. And with that, yeah, we welcome you to get started with Docker Hub today, and we're excited to really hear about your feedback. We've also opened up the Docker, recently opened up the public roadmap on Docker, and we have a Docker Hub section. So if you do see things that you would like added to the roadmap, we're putting a lot of time and kind of attention into the organization capabilities, things like integration with IDP providers, SAML, SSO, those types of solutions. We'd love to hear your feedback on those as well. All right, so with that, let's open it up to Q&A.
All right, so it's just combing through some of the questions here. I see there's quite a few comments about, pardon for the size of the CLI window. Apologies, that was not necessarily legible. Let's see what else we have here. So one of the questions that was asked is, can we use Docker on a production environment, or is it only used? Yes, can you use Docker in a production environment? So Absolutely, yes. Thousands of, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of companies are using Docker today in production. Large organizations, banks, insurance companies, healthcare organizations, retail organizations are using Docker to develop, store, and run their applications in a production environment. So on the desktop, naturally, Docker Desktop is the tool of choice for development teams, and Docker Hub is also a solution for storing your containers and also configuring the CI pipelines that we just walked through. From a runtime perspective, yes, there's a couple different options that you do have available to you. Principally cloud managed services. These are services that are typically offered by the cloud providers, Google, Azure, Amazon principally. And so Amazon offers a service called EKS, which is a cloud managed Kubernetes environment that allows you to run Docker containers relatively easily. Similarly, Microsoft through their Azure product line also offers an AKS service, and Google with GKE. If you're so inclined, you can also kind of run and operate a container management platform yourself. This is a product line that companies like Mirantis currently offer. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely, there are number of customers that are running Docker in production today. Let's see, we have a couple questions here around training and certifications. So yes, as well. I think if you just do a quick Google search for Docker training, Docker resources, there's countless examples. I would direct you first and foremost to the Docker docs documentation. It's available on docs.docker.com. That's the source of truth for really learning about Docker, both from the engine to the desktop, as well as Docker Hub. There's a couple other resources that I would also point out, and I'll include this in the actual question form field, which are the Docker 101 tutorial and the Docker birthday challenge, which are a set of kind of fun exercises that you can walk through typical use cases to understand how you can address some of the fundamentals of Docker or learn about the fundamentals of Docker. There's also, let's see, we've got a question here about how can I delete some images, basically how can I delete images presumably from the CLI. So yes, if you go to the aforementioned Docker docs resources, you can find a number of official documentation around different commands within the Docker CLI, of which there is a Docker image rm command, and that allows you to basically specify an image locally that you can then delete, and I think there's a -- force option, which force deletes the image even if there's a running container. So yeah, absolutely, there are options there. Let's see. In a free plan, are all repos public? No private repos. So so Docker Hub offers for individual accounts, it does offer a free plan that includes one private repository. If you do have requirements for additional private repositories, there are a number of different options. As an individual, you can choose anywhere between 5, 10, 25, 50, up to 500 private repositories, and there's a corresponding number of parallel builds that are associated with that. And likewise, if you're an organization, you have a similar per repo and per parallel build option. Private repos to my organization. Yes. So the question is, can I add private repos to my organization? The answer is yes. The only caveat is you do not get a free private repo is not available as part of the organization tier. So you'll have to basically sign up for one of the plans that we just pointed out that allows you to choose the number of private repos that are available to you. All right, I think that about does it for most of the questions that I'm seeing here. But again, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today and really learning a little bit more about the foundation and the fundamentals of Docker and Docker Hub. There will be a series, this is one of a series of webinars that will be released in the coming weeks. And we really encourage you to join those webinars to learn a little bit more about Docker Hub, and take a look at the resources that we pointed to at the tail end of the demo. So Tricia, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ryan, so much for covering today's Doc Talk. For the audience, there were a few questions still in chat coming in, so we will get to those questions offline. And this event has been recorded, so everyone will get a recording of this event to share with colleagues. And we just want to say thank you all for giving your time to Docker today, and look for also a follow-up blog post in our upcoming series where we continue into some more advanced features as Ryan just talked about. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ryan.
Pleasure. Thanks, folks.